The year is 1903. The world stands between two centuries, dragging the weight of empires, yet chasing the fire of invention. Across continents, new borders were drawn, old powers collapsed, and beneath the smoke, history was being written in silence and fire. Some moments were monumental, others nearly forgotten, but all of them changed the world in ways we're still trying to understand. In part 1 of our journey through 1903, we explore 10 powerful events, many buried by time, but none lacking impact. If you haven't yet seen part 1 of our 1902 special, click the card above. But now, step aboard history's time machine. This is 1900 Chronicles. Welcome to 1903. January 1st, 1903. As dawn breaks over Delhi, 1,000 banners flutter in the winter air. The empire is preparing to put on a show the world has never seen. 500,000 people gather, nobles in jewel-toned turbans, soldiers in polished boots, and elephants clad in ceremonial armor. But King Edward VII is not here. His absence is filled with pageantry. Viceroy Lord Curzon assumes the stage, a lone figure presiding over a sea of spectacle. Elephants march in synchronized lines, cannons boom and salute. The Red Fort echoes with fireworks and fanfare. A formal declaration resounds. Edward VII is now Emperor of India, not by birthright, but by proclamation, from across the sea. For some, it's glory. For others, humiliation. Beneath the silk and brass lies a deeper truth. The empire is tightening its grip. It would be the last Grand Durbar of its kind, a final echo of empire before the winds of independence would begin to stir. March 5th, 1903. In Constantinople, beneath the dome of imperial ambition, ink touches paper, and a railway begins to redraw the Middle East. The Germans promised steel and engineering. The Ottomans offered land and silence. The railway would stretch from Constantinople to Baghdad, threading through deserts, mountains, and old empires. But it wasn't just about transport. It was about control, of oil, of trade, of the heart of the East. Britain and France watched nervously. A German rail line to Baghdad meant a backdoor to India and a threat to their colonial grasp. Construction would be slow, dangerous, and fiercely political. Spies, sabotage, and shifting alliances would follow every rail spike. The Baghdad Railway wasn't just tracks, it was the fuse that led to empire's collision course with war. August 2nd, 1903. In the rugged hills of Macedonia, thunder wasn't from the sky. It was from rebellion. Revolutionaries rose against the Ottoman Empire, proclaiming the Kruševo Republic, a tiny nation born from defiance. For 10 days they held the town, printing proclamations, forming councils, and daring to imagine freedom. Then the empire answered. Ottoman troops swarmed the town with fire and steel. Over 6,000 homes were destroyed. Thousands fled. The dream of a republic was reduced to ash. But the fire lit in Kruševo would not go out. The uprising became legend, a cry for freedom whispered for generations. Ilinden was crushed, but it became the seed of future revolutions. In a quiet Washington office on November 18, 1903, the future of a continent was signed into being, with barely a Panamanian in the room. The Bunau-Varilla Treaty handed the U.S. control of the Panama Canal Zone for $10 million and the promise of protection. There was just one problem. Bunau-Varilla wasn't Panamanian. He hadn't lived there in years, but he spoke for a nation anyway. In Panama, resentment simmered, but for the U.S., it was a golden key, access to a waterway that would cut the world in half. The deal made headlines. A modern empire was taking shape, one built on blueprints, not battles. It would take a decade, thousands of lives, and engineering miracles, but the canal began here in ink and ambition. The world's geography was about to change, and the ink was barely dry. March 2nd, 1903. On East 29th Street in Manhattan, a tall brick building opened its doors, not to businessmen, but to women, and only women. In an era when most hotels refused unaccompanied women, this was revolutionary. A sanctuary of dignity, safety, and independence. Single women could live, travel, and work in the city, without a male escort and without judgment. The hotel became a symbol, not of luxury, but of liberty. Writers, teachers, suffragists, and actresses walked its halls, free to belong to no man and every ambition. In brick and mortar, the Martha Washington was a declaration. Women were here to stay. And in the heart of the city, progress had quietly found a permanent address. In the emerald heart of Puerto Rico, a sacred rainforest was granted protection on January 17, 1903. El Yunque, lush, untamed, and humming with life, became the first tropical forest reserve in the United States. Long before climate change entered headlines, a quiet movement began to preserve what progress could easily destroy. But El Yunque wasn't just trees and waterfalls. It was sacred land to the Taino people, whispered to be the home of gods. The forest held stories, myths, medicines, and now a promise. It would endure. Protected not for profit, but for posterity, El Yunque was a vow made in wood and water. In an age of industry, El Yunque reminded the world, some treasures aren't meant to be built. They're meant to be left alone. Before satellites or fiber optics, there was only air, and on January 19, 1903, a voice crossed the Atlantic without ever touching a wire. It was a brief signal, crackling from Massachusetts to Cornwall, England. Faint, but unmistakable. The message? A test of reach, not words. But it proved something staggering. Air itself could carry thought. It was the birth of global wireless and the death of isolation. From that moment on, no ocean would be wide enough to silence the human voice. The world had whispered across an ocean, and the world had answered. In that faint transmission, the 20th century had found its voice. July 23, 1903. Henry Ford didn't invent the car, but on this day, he began selling it to the masses. A dentist from Chicago became the first buyer, paying $850 for a machine that would change everything. The car was small, simple, and revolutionary. Within 5 years, Ford would sell hundreds of thousands. America would never walk the same again. Cities stretched, families moved, freedom had wheels. The age of industry had found its engine, and it rumbled. The automobile wasn't a machine, it was momentum. August 10th, 1903. Paris, the city of light, suddenly went dark underground. A faulty train ignited a fire inside the Couronnes station. Panic spread faster than smoke. Flames consumed car after car. Metal screeched. Lights failed. In the confusion, the exits vanished. 84 souls were lost that night. It was one of the deadliest subway disasters in history. The tragedy forced a reckoning. Fire codes, exits, electrical standards, all rewritten underground. Paris had modernized too fast and paid the price in ash. But from the ruins, a safer world would slowly be built. In the quiet town of Lowell, Massachusetts, the ground shook without warning on July 29, 1903. A powder room at the U.S. Cartridge Company had exploded, sending steel, fire, and lives into the air. 22 people perished instantly. Dozens more were injured. The town fell into mourning. It wasn't the first factory blast, and wouldn't be the last. Workplace safety was still a dream. When powder met heat, the results were always the same. But each tragedy wrote another line in the laws that would one day save millions. The blast silenced voices, but not their legacy. 10 events, 10 echoes from a year lost to time, yet each one still ripples in the world we live in. Some left ash in the air, some left revolutions in their wake, and some simply lit a spark that would grow into an empire, a movement, or an engine. This was only part 1. There are 10 more moments waiting in part 2, including an eruption that wiped a city from the map. If you found yourself surprised, haunted, or inspired by this journey, subscribe and join us as we uncover the hidden stories of the 1900s every Sunday. History is never just the past. It's everything we've chosen to remember and everything we've tried to forget.